Good evening. We'll let a few more people drift in and then we'll have an official beginning. Okay. Welcome everyone to our weekly gathering of Mission Dharma. Uh-oh, somebody has their microphone on. Let's see. Much better. Anyway, welcome. Missed being with you last week, but I know you were in good hands with Nikki, marvelous teacher who actually I crossed paths with because I was at Spirit Rock teaching a retreat and she was on her way there to lead a retreat. And she's there now and I'm here. So we've switched places. And I feel very full having been on retreat or leading a retreat for a week, and once again, quite inspired by watching what emerges from our intrinsic nature that often gets occluded or blocked by the busyness of our lives and the untrained quality of our minds. But when our attention is able to sustain itself over any kind of length of time, we empty ourselves of our usual preoccupations. There's this beautiful sense of clarity and love that begins to flow, the sweetness that emanates from each person, whether they're struggling or happy, or there's still just such a, it just reminds me and gives me so much confidence that all of us are intrinsically good and heartful, and you can think of the worst person in the world that you think of, and that you know that their actions that are so disturbing and cause suffering is really born of confusion and ignorance, and that even they, in their deeper nature, is goodness just waiting to emerge. But meanwhile, we have to be able to be fortified enough to take people just as they are, take ourselves just as we are, and even if we spend a lot of our time in a state of confusion or grief or reactivity, we have to develop a very wise and loving relationship to ourselves and, of course, to other beings in order not to feed the divisiveness and polarization in our world. So I can't think of anything more valuable than to use our precious time to recover our natural wakefulness, our goodwill, our tenderness, our equanimity, balance. And what I've said many times before is nobody does this very well alone. We do it best when we're alone together. And so thank you you may not think of it all the time, but when you show up, you're not just supporting yourself, getting something from Tuesday night or Mission Dharma, you're giving something and you're holding the whole community up. So thank you. So let's practice a little bit. And as always, the way that we recover our basic goodness is to just feel ourselves as we are, not the idea of ourselves, but just the felt experience. Return to simplicity. And that can be a little bit of a dance, trying to keep our mind in the same place as our body. We're used to toppling forward. We're used to being quite caught in the projections of the future. So it takes a little getting used to just having our attention settled in our body, and our body just filling our awareness, so that there are not two things going on. There's just mind, body together. Just one taste. And know that if we are feeling our sitting body here, that we are connecting with reality, because the past is just a memory and the future is just a dream. So there really is just this. So this is a back to reality, back to nature practice. And know that if you are here, fully here, embodied, your mind is momentarily empty of its usual obsessions, preoccupations, fixations, and it's just returning to simplicity. Just 6 things: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and it may be noticing the thinking mind. That's all. And our nervous system needs a little dose of simplicity, since we often experience the world is complicated. But in real time, it's simple. So simply feel your sitting body. Notice how your body just begins to settle into a gentle stillness when you close your eyes and let your body fill your mind and your mind fill your body. There's a natural stilling without trying to still it. There's a natural quieting without trying to quiet. So just let yourself enjoy the body's experience of sitting. Just the posture, just the shape or form, just the aliveness. Let this feeling just keep calling you here. And if you stay here long enough embodied, you'll naturally notice and maybe even enjoy the body's experience of its own breathing. And just using our body's breath and our body as an anchor to this present moment. So not letting our mind leave our body, at least that's the intention. Not letting our attention leave the breath. For these first minutes anyway. And we can keep returning to this body and breath as our home base, as our anchor. But we also graciously receive and welcome specific sensations that call our attention, whether that's aching or burning, or stabbing or tingling or vibrating or pulsing. We welcome those sensations, letting them fill our awareness. Let yourself receive these experiences with acceptance and curiosity, just noticing how it is and what happens when we feel things through the body. We also welcome sounds that may become stronger than the breath or body. We just notice the hearing process, how sounds arise and fade, and remind us of the changing nature of everything. We welcome moods when they come, and we feel them through our body like internal weather. And we welcome the thoughts and images as an object of mindfulness, noticing how they float through our mind like clouds moving through a windy sky. Everything welcome, letting everything come and go, and continuing when nothing is calling our attention to settle it into the body. And notice each breath, each half breath, each moment. Knowing that we don't have to lift out of this moment to find what we're looking for, which is reality. And the peace and ease that is the peace and ease of our nature when we're not going out of ourselves in search. Just this moment, just this body or breath, or whatever it is that calls our attention. Equal opportunity mindfulness. Supported by the anchor of the body and breath. If you're noticing the breath as an anchor, Sink into that experience. Stick to it, spread out all around it. Not missing any part of the in-breath as it presents itself, and the out-breath. Notice if at the end of the out-breath and before the next in-breath there's a space, and see if you can sustain the attention even in the space between the breaths, if there is one. And in that space, feeling the openness or feeling the sitting body during that time, just feeling the whole body or a touch point until the next in-breath calls your attention. It's often this space between the breaths where our mind just slips off into the dream world, fantasy world. If you want to stay here, sustain through the whole duration and the space if there is one. Just this breath, just this moment. Inevitably, from time to time, you'll realize that your mind has been lost in thought, daydreaming, fantasizing. The moment that you become aware of that, that's a moment of mindfulness, coming back online. Appreciate that moment of being awake again, aware, and in support of remaining aware, we anchor our attention to real-time experience. We make nothing more of it than that. The wandering mind is just a habit, it's not personal. We just keep encouraging mindfulness and clear comprehension that we're here. We're breathing and we're sitting together. Just this moment. The word for mindfulness in Pali is sati, which actually means remembering. Remembering to notice where you are, what you're experiencing. Very little effort is involved. Simply remembering that you're here, that you're aware, and what you're aware of. So if you're trying to make something happen, resisting something, you're actually creating tension that's not part of mindfulness. It's something that we can become aware of or remember, that we're grasping, resisting. This remembering, this being mindful, it has no destination other than here. It isn't problem solving, it's not fixing, it's not figuring out, it's just being aware of the presently arising experience. Body, breath, mind, moods. Just this moment, just this body, just this breath, or whatever is predominant. When you hear the sound of the gong, just be aware of hearing. When you notice the sound arise and fade, be aware of the impulse to open the eyes, experience opening your eyes. Notice the arising of outer sight, of seeing, the impulse to make other movements. So the practice continues, continuously. Everything equal in this remembering. Deep pleasure sitting with you, being back with you. Welcome back, Mary. Thanks for being co-host. I'd like to invite as many people who are willing to put on your cameras and say hello to each other, which we didn't do before we started to sit today. Feel free to unmute and then we'll continue. Feel free to say where you're calling in from. And let it simulate a little, almost like a break in the action, like as though we were in person. But it would require that we can see and hear each other a little bit more. Hope that's not too much to ask. Means unmute and say good evening.
Hi from San Francisco.
Hi from San Francisco.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
San Francisco.
Hello from Burlingame.
Hey, David.
I'm in
Good evening from Connecticut.
everybody.
Humboldt County here.
Humboldt County, great.
Barbara.
Hey, Mary.
Good evening from Berkeley.
Hey, Keith.
Hi from Edmonton.
Hey, Leith.
From
Be there.
Missouri.
I'll be there this Friday.
Hi from Tucson.
Hey, Linda. Or was that? Oh, that was Lori, right? Sorry.
Hello from Regina.
Hey, Maureen.
Good evening from Richmond.
Hey, Christopher. Good to see you all.
Hi from Vancouver, BC.
Hi, Karen.
Hi from San Francisco.
Hi, Amy. Good to have you back. Okay. So I'm curious. What happened during your sitting tonight? Were there anything you noticed in particular? Any questions that arose? Comments, descriptions, also any topics that emerged from your practice this evening or your practice in general. Feel free to use the raised hand function or raise your hand physically, and either I'll call on you or Mary might help me. Anything anybody want to speak about or describe, question, topic? Please, Mark.
Well, I noticed something a little different in this sitting. I was restless. I noticed some restlessness, which I I don't think I've really ever usually I notice sleepiness. But this time it's rare for me to notice restlessness, but it was definitely restlessness. That's all.
And what happened when there was the awareness of restlessness? What happened next?
Well, I'm not sure. I noticed that I was aware of it, but then all the moving and my hands moving around and all that, I kind of tried to make them stop, which of course I wasn't able to do. And I tried to think about what am I restless about. That didn't get me anywhere either. So I just sort of left it at that.
Okay. Yeah, it's fine. Generally, we tend to just try to make space for that experience of restlessness, or just as long as it's been accepted, to then just drop in the the unconditional quality of calm. You just drop that in, and then let your mind be very open and spacious. Even if the body's restless, you know, you've heard me probably share it many times, the Zen expression, the way to control a cow is to give it a big pasture. So you want to give your mind and your body a big pasture. And sometimes it'll be agitated for a while, but somehow the receptivity and ideally the kindness or the acceptance that meets it, and sometimes it eases up. And if not, it's just restless mind being restless.
Well, then I started noticing a question, which is sort of the $64 question. And I said to myself, who is it that's restless? And
Great question. Then what happened?
nothing.
Yeah, restless is what we say in terms of what's really noticed is restless is restless. There's
Okay.
nobody being restless.
Okay, that's good.
Like
Yeah.
sadness is sad. It's just
Anxiety is anxiety. I get it.
exactly,
Okay,
and
I
the
got it.
tendency is to add the identity to it, and then tend to embellish that with a whole narrative and a whole identity view. The Buddha called Sakaya Ditti, a self view. I am this,
Self-view.
rather than just anxiety or just restlessness. And that's the difference between mindful attention and thinking about.
Yes, it keeps flipping back and forth very fast sometimes.
Yeah, well said. Anyway, Mary, I think you were next. Thanks, Mark.
Hey, I don't know if I can put this into words, but I'm going to try. Um, I love the feeling of, being in the moment, being in the present, feeling, sensing things, being sort of alive and calm and peaceful. But I was noticing tonight, when I was meditating, if I wasn't in my thinking mind, like the past or the future, where I'm planning or I'm analyzing something else, I had this kind of impression that I also felt being in that space or not in the past or the future. I also felt kind of was like a little stupid or neurotic or something. It's really hard to put into words, and I was like shocked by that. I felt that.
That you thought it was kind of that was kind of a stupid.
Yeah, like,
Well, that's
like I'm not thinking, I'm not planning, I'm not doing,
Yeah, that I think that's probably true for a lot of people when it's just quiet or calm. They will often say, "This is boring" or "I'm bored," and of course, if we really let ourselves hover in that what we call stupid and really just feel it and experience it, it actually opens up. It opens up a quality of balance and equanimity and silence and peace and love, and all those things open up, but we often jump right past it by thinking it's stupid. And so it's really, I love that you confessed that conditioning, that I think it's things come because they're conditioned, and we tend to in our culture associate simplicity with boredom or stupid.
it's like I think I've always have passed it, and all of a sudden I realized I had that feeling. So
Yeah.
I thought I might as well share it with the other person. So thank you for.
No, thank you. And I think you probably gave voice to what other people may unconsciously feel when things are quiet. I should be doing something else. That's
Right,
yeah.
something
Thank you.
constructive.
Yeah.
Thanks, Howie.
Thank you. Maureen, please feel free.
Hello, Howie.
Hello, Maureen.
I just had the kind of a breakthrough of sorts. I was chronic cough that is very troublesome and a lot of anxiety around that is a whole cycle. But this time, for some reason or other, I was able to follow the breath and just be with the coughing without projecting into the future or whatever it is that happens with the tightening and not liking it. It was lovely. Thank you for that remembering to be just here now. Thanks.
Yeah, just here now. Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, I think you're reminding us that just here now, even though for Mary, she had a moment where that seemed maybe stupid, but just here now is a protection from the tendency of our mind to then embellish or to project on what it means about the future, and to just be able to experience coughing as coughing or breathing with coughing. And it sounds like the suffering about it prevented some of the extra suffering about it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? John, was that you who?
Well, yeah, it looked like Mark had his hand up too again.
Ah,
Go
okay.
ahead. I already hogged up a lot of the time.
Not hogged, not at all.
But I was just curious how I had this experience of being able to count to 10. I think Joseph Goldstein or someplace. I counted my breaths up to 10 and started at 1 again. And I did it pretty successfully for the whole meditation. And I'm just wondering whether this is going back to the question I just heard. Am I occupying what otherwise might have been being present with some kind of mindless activity by doing that?
No. You may be preventing your mind from spinning out in discursive thought by using that as a tool to help you stay present. Ideally, if you're counting the breaths, you still want 95% of your sensitivity and your remembering to be the experience of breathing, and ideally 5%, that little whisper in the mind, as transparent as a dragonfly wing. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
But most of the sensitivity to the feeling of the knowing and the feeling that there is a breath happening. So in a way, its use is to actually help orient you and help keep you in reality and develop some stability, so that when your mind does do what it will inevitably do, start planning, remembering, liking, disliking, all kinds of thinking, that you can at least notice it and treat it lovingly, treating it wisely.
Okay, that helps. I think it did help me keep on the breath. It did a pretty good job.
It's offered as a tool to help you stay in real time, to help you stay connected.
Good, thanks.
Yeah. But part of the art of it is to see when the number takes over and you stop actually being aware of the breath, because that's really what it's meant to do. And when a number takes over, we can just become very, I wanted to say hypnotized, but more intoxicated by the roteness of the number, which means you could be entering into a kind of mindless trance.
Super, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, last call, and then we'll pause. Okay. So being on retreat this last week, was, another reminder. I don't know if I was saying to this group or telling someone that I was leading this retreat for probably the 35th time, literally half of my life, on Labor Day at Spirit Rock, or the retreat centers we used to use on Labor Day for the Labor Day retreat. And I think the reason that it's a gift that keeps on giving for me, and that I keep being quite enthusiastic about it, and why I'm enthusiastic really every Tuesday when I get a chance to practice with you and share the good news of the Dharma in a world that's just so heartbreaking, is that as I mentioned to the people who were here early in our call, I get a chance to see what the fruit, I get so much evidence about what happens when one has their attention in real time in a sustained way with the support of other people. And I said earlier about how people's eyes clear, and it's incredible at the end of the retreat how much light is literally radiating from the people in the room. And sitting up front, you get to see that, and then feel how tender people's hearts are. And that's really what we're made of, light and love. And that just shines through when our minds are a little bit more empty of their usual contractions and preoccupations and occlusions and everything that we very innocently get bound up in, that causes us to forget our natural goodness and that love and that light of attention that lives in us as us. So it's so faith building just to witness all of that. But what's even more inspiring in a way, and what I wanted to give a little more voice to tonight, was the dramatic shift that occurs in one's relationship to one's mind. Because it's funny, we don't travel any distance when we're practicing other than to get to the center. But while we're there, the way goes nowhere. It's just about staying exactly where you are. And yet the distance from the micro distance between being just carried along by the stream of our mind, lost in our mind, to noticing it, that kind of waking up and noticing that the thinking mind is thinking, the feeling mind is feeling, the seeing mind is seeing. I'm talking about inner sight, which is kind of the element of the practice we call mind. And I'm using this language of mind right now just to point to the contents of our consciousness in the mental world. We have the contents of our consciousness. We have 5 physical senses and what we experience through the senses, through the body. And then we have 1 mental sense. So it's in the Buddha's teachings, it's 6 sense doors, 6 sense bases. And there are the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind is considered a sense base. And that's a sound, as you may be able to hear. That's Belle, who's a great protector. Not a great time for her to be barking, but that's the way it goes. So a thought or a feeling or an inner sight is to our mind as a sound is to the ear, as a smell is to the nose, as a taste is to the tongue, as a sensation is to the body. It's just a sense experience. And so the mind is quite an incredible thing with all the thoughts, this whole world, this whole online experience, being able to meet this way, all emerged out of mental formations and the creativity that can flow from within our minds, within our consciousness, in the door of perception called mind. So there is a tendency, and I know I've spoken of this before, there is a tendency to relate to our mind, this part of our, this domain of our sense experience, to relate to it in a slightly contentious way, and to think thoughts are a problem, and if we're thinking that somehow we're doing it wrong, and there's just so much subtle dividing that gets taken place between body and mind, as though they're actually two things. They're really not. So mind-body process is what we are, and there's no dividing line between any of it. And yet, somehow, you hear the word mind, you go, oh, my mind. Or their mind. That person's mind. So when we refer to mind, we usually refer to its sometimes just radically unruly quality, that it's just kind of incessantly thinking, and sometimes to the point of being maniacal. I mean, like crazy, and often cruel and ruthless, and often when it's been given preeminence in the world of consciousness, and it is not, and there's no awareness of it, it tends to run amok and create imaginary worlds. I know I've shared with you the very simple teaching from Dujum Rinpoche, where he says, isn't it true that after your last thought has ceased, and before the next one comes, is there not a vivid clarity? And without anything in particular to see, just clarity. He says, ho, which means amazing. This is awareness. This is, and in elements of the teachings, this ho, this is awareness, this vivid clarity. This is considered the essence of mind. So the essence of mind is vivid, clear, open, responsive, boundless, free, it's the best. But Dujum Rinpoche then follows that reminder of the essence of mind with, but isn't it true that a thought suddenly arises? And if that thought is noticed, the thought is related to and seen as just an expression of mind, it's not a problem at all. It's kind of amazing. It's part of, oh, how amazing that the mind thinks. But if that thought goes unnoticed, it spreads out into ordinary thinking. And this Dujum Rinpoche calls the chain of delusion. Because when it goes unnoticed, that in that chain of delusion, mind creates an imaginary universe and I think most problematic and confusing and innocent really is that it creates a version of you that is more historical in nature, more like a story, and it's and to the degree that story of myself that plays in my mind moves to becomes because of what the Buddha called avidya, or ignorance, that story is taken to be who I actually am. Are you still with me? To the degree that that story is taken to be who we are, and we're not aware that a story of ourself is not ourselves, that it's a series of thoughts. How amazing is that? It is miraculous that we can create a version of that our mind can create a version of us that somehow relates to this body, relates to the history, relates to family, relates to everything. It's amazing that it can do that, but the case of mistaken identity is we think that the thought of myself is myself. And that's where a lot of the problems get going. Because then if I think that the thought of myself is myself, and I don't realize that little story or that little thought is just a thought. It has no substance to it. It has no fundamental reality. As that thought begins to fade, in order to keep up the charade, to keep up the case of mistaken identity, it has to just keep building, defending, protecting, liberating, judging, comparing, analyzing, and pretty soon we've just entered into a phantasmagorical version of ourselves, in some ways describing somebody that doesn't exist. So it's a problem when we've mistaken that story for you that's sitting here right now, for the indescribable experience of yourself that's sitting right here tonight, even on this call. That when we are really fully present here, we can't even find that story. We can't even find our history. We can't even find the common version that most of us are tormented by, that there's something wrong with us. There's a problem that needs to be solved in us. We can't even find it in real time. But as long as we live there in that imagined version of ourselves, our bodies tend to get very tight, very contracted. And the contraction of our body that comes with wanting to be okay when I'm not okay, every time that there's a contraction and a wanting or not wanting who I think I am. Any of you have any of those? Wanting to be different than the way we are, or not wanting to be who we. Every time we contract, our body contracts, then that contraction releases, almost secretes more discursive thinking, more, that narrative just feeds. And yet the stepping off of that wheel of the imagined me, the imagined you, the story of us, is literally a split second of remembering, of mindful awareness, rising up to notice, oh, that's a thought of self. A thought of self is not myself. And then usually it doesn't, this shifting of relationship to the mind that thinks, the mind that plans, the mind that creates, this incredible mind, once we start to make a shift to noticing it for what it is, it's a domain of sense experience that manifests this whole world of form of us being able to be here tonight. But when we first make that little shift, the most obvious thing is that the mind is thinking. And we can actually begin to, the first change in relationship is that we're no longer carried along by it. We're actually noticing it. And what I thought was this reality that I was living in is just thinking mind, thinking, and that those thoughts aren't a world. They are these little disparate little bubbles that have discontinuity. They actually end, and there's gaps in them. And it's no wonder that when there's a little gap, when the last thought has ceased and the next one comes, not only do we find the vivid clarity, but as Mary was saying earlier, we may feel a little stupid at first. May feel like, well, who am I or what am I now? I was a really interesting person, even if I was a misery in my mind. At least it was an interesting story. Now I'm just quiet. But as Nisargadatta says, if you stay in that quiet, if you stay in it a while, you'll discover that it's permeated with light and love. And you can see it over and over on retreat, that radiance of heart, of light and love. He says, once you've tasted that experience of light, you'll never be the same person again. The unruly mind will break that peace and obliterate that vision, but it's bound to return if the effort is sustained to just stay here till all bonds are broken, grasping and attachment to that thought world ends and life becomes much more concentrated in the present. But meanwhile, we are so conditioned to be carried along by that stream of distress in our mind. We're so conditioned that when we do begin to wake up to where we are, we can see how radically unruly our minds have become. That's one of the things, especially with the backdrop of quietness, you can just, that was one of the things that inspired me to practice. I practiced up in, this was the 1970s, I was up in the mountains of New Mexico. And I was offered insight meditation instructions where you just pay attention to the breath and then pay attention to your mind. And I had never really paid attention to my mind before. I'd done TM, I'd followed a mantra, I'd tranquilized my mind a little bit, but I'd never paid attention to my mind. And I was in this exquisite, beautiful, silent mountain retreat, just pristine and quiet, the quiet like I'd never heard, but my mind was just zooming. And the contrast between the quiet of the mountain and this maniacal mind, this crazy mind, it made me so curious. It told me I saw myself as, in the loose way of describing it, I saw myself as mentally ill, and that I was really onto something that would be really useful. And then it became so interesting to, instead of being just carried along by that, to notice it like, wow. So even now, whatever you've practiced, most of you have practiced enough to be able to begin to relate to your mind. And it's essential when we see how conditioned it is and how in some ways crazy it is, that we regard it with so much kindness and appreciation, because it is quite miraculous. It's one of those, I love that Tibetan word that they use to describe mind, not just the essence of mind, but just everything that can be known in our universe as emaho. How amazing. But if we're busy just thinking our mind is a problem to be solved, and just that, we miss that there's something quite wondrous about our thinking mind. It's wondrous about being able to take disparate thoughts and form them into a narrative that approximates our life, that honors our history, that honors our likes and dislikes. Even though it obscures the simple reality of you that can never be put in words, still it's amazing that the story of me even can play. And of course, when you look at it as just thoughts, you can't find a story, you just find thoughts coming and going. But nevertheless, we all have a story. And that is mind made. But it doesn't define us. But it's something it's important that we relate to with kindness, with forgiveness. Because whatever mental formations you have, whatever mental habits, whatever way you see yourself as above, below, or equal, or compare, it's all conditioning that is driven by things that you've learned or things that it comes from lack of attention, from not having attended to it. And most of us lived most of our lives before we actually began to relate to it, relate to our minds. So we have to forgive ourselves for being just chronic thinkers and chronic negative thinkers, chronic comparing thinkers, chronic judgers, chronic evaluators, chronic narrators, chronic planners. That's all systemic in a way. It's all cultural. It's all things that we've just learned either externally or we've learned in our families. Often on retreats, the most obvious and most difficult mental formation that meditators tend to have to deal with is the judging mind. People are absolutely blown away how many mind moments are judging oneself or judging others. And it's pretty shocking. And often if somebody's really tormented by a strong inner critic, and it's directed a lot inwardly, usually, and I think it's the same even if it's directed outwardly, usually it is conditioned by having, and you can reflect on this for yourself, it may hit the spot, it may not, but it usually reflects one of the parents in your family of origin. And it sounds a little bit, if you ask yourself, whose voice is that? Is it mom? Is it dad? Is it some kind of significant person in the life who that judging voice sounds like? And so as an instruction on retreat, we'll just say, just each time you see that judging mind, and already there's a little liberation because you're starting to relate to the judging mind. But at first, there's still such strong identification with it, so much believing that's me and that it's my fault and I'm doing this, and it just is all wrapped up in an identity. But then when you just begin to see the judging mind judging, and you hear that voice and it doesn't seem to stop, it just keeps coming. It's really helpful if you give it a little space and begin to relate to it without being so caught up in it. And one of the ways that one can do that is to notice which parent it is. And then each time the judging mind comes, you say, my mom's name was Sylvia, or Babe, as they call her. I say, thank you, Babe. Thank you, Babe. Thank you, Babe. And again, once you see that over and over again, it just becomes a lot less personal, a lot less me and mine, and then just the judging mind judging. And then when you see that it's really not anybody's fault, it's just through conditions and through conditioning that these habits of mind get set in motion and then get reinforced in practice. When you see over and over, when you're paying attention, that these are just coming completely unbidden. The thinking mind is coming, the judging mind is coming, the comparing mind is coming, the planning mind. You're sitting there just trying to stay present, simple in your body, and the planning comes, and the remembering comes, and the judging comes, and the rehearsing comes. Then it becomes a little clearer that it's very impersonal. It's not your fault. And so one of the more profound ways that the mind stops taking it personally and stop judging the judging is to see that there's no judger. It's just a habit of mind. And then it starts to seem it seems foolish at a certain point to judge oneself for something that is just happening all by itself. But in any case, the relationship is beginning to shift from identification, it's me, it's mine, and it's bad, to, judging, mind judging. Almost one of my colleagues, friends, James Barras, used to add at the end of all his judgments, see the judging mind, then he'd say, and the sky is blue. Just sky is blue. So befriending our mind, appreciating its miraculousness, how amazing, befriending our habits, and in the tormenting habits, befriending it means having mercy and compassion toward this mind. Not suppressing it, not deny it, not acting it out, but meeting it with a kind, compassionate attention. And we shouldn't really need to forgive ourselves for our minds, but forgiveness, just infusing our mind stream with forgiveness, is just a good antidote for the tendency to relate to ourselves with so much ill will. I actually think it's useful, in some ways the phrases that we cultivate in some of the traditional, what are called the Brahma Vihara practices, the four heavenly abodes, the practice of metta, of loving kindness, of karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, appreciative joy, equanimity, and the phrases that reawaken those qualities in us. In a way, we're talking to ourselves. We're, instead of inclining our mind toward practicing and reinforcing what we call the unwholesome qualities of mind, judging, comparing, wanting, not wanting, the obsessions of the mind, instead of infusing our mind stream with things that actually lead us to feel more tension and more dissatisfaction, we infuse our mind stream. We actually participate in the cultivation of this aspect of our experience called mind. We participate in it by bringing some intentionality to it and bringing love to it, bringing, like I said before, forgiveness, compassion, kindness. But so in a way, those practices are thinking. They're talking to yourself. They're using. I would say it's probably the best use of your conceptual mind is to incline it toward love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Can't do anything. You can't find a better use of your thinking mind. And it's very central in the Buddhist teaching that whatever you frequently think about, dwell upon, and maybe up to this point it's been unconscious and you were carried along by a stream of distress. Padmasambhava, if you want to understand your past, look at your present experience. So we may have been carried along up to this point, but he says if you want to understand your future, look at your present actions. So every day we can be infusing our mind stream with thoughts of goodwill. thoughts of compassion, thoughts of joy, thoughts of equanimity, thoughts of generosity, thoughts of wise reflection, thoughts of wise reflection. We can reflect every day on impermanence. That'll help us let go. We can reflect every day on the 5 remembrances. I'm sure to become sick. I'm sure to become old. I'm sure to die. I'm sure to become separated from everything that I hold near and dear. Just to develop some dispassion toward the clinging that we experience to youth and health and life. That's a beautiful infusion that helps us learn to let go and be in harmony with life. Beautiful to infuse our mind stream with reflections on our life being precious. Things like gratitude for our existence, gratitude for our friends, our families, our good fortune of being able to be here on Tuesday nights, or if you feel that. I feel it. But when I infuse my mind with and make a practice of being grateful, it's gladdening to the heart, and it loosens the tendency to be grumpy and complain and to feel like something's wrong. So mind is something that's very malleable. It's very creative, and we can love that creative element and participate in it. So talk to ourselves in a healthy way. So it's changing one's relationship, it's participating in it, it's letting the nature of mind remind us that a thought of ourselves is not ourselves. I always think whenever I talk about this, I notice the difference between what I actually experience in real time and the story that my mind tells. And I remember the line from James J. Audubon that I've probably repeated thousands of times, but he said, if there's a difference between the bird and what the field guidebook says, believe the bird. And if there's a difference between the version of you that plays in your mind and you sitting here, believe what you experience right now. Not the secondhand view, but the real time. And know that this is right now the field of creative possibility, where you can both change your relationship to your mind. That itself is infusing a new quality, a quality of curiosity and openness and mindfulness, which is also an aspect of mind. It's considered a wholesome mental factor that purifies all the unwholesome mental factors, just mindfulness itself. And then mindfulness infused with loving kindness doesn't get any better than that. It's really up to us. That's the creative part of being human. But how amazing is that? And I can't have this conversation without remembering and without naming that the torments of the world right now are really just a wider expression of the torments of our mind. And it is really within the power of each of us to change the world one person at a time. And, help wherever we can, incline our mind toward helping wherever we can. But there's no greater help than you being able to change your relationship to your mind and cultivate the wholesome and abandon the unwholesome. For you to discover peace so that you're not busy trying so you're not busy blaming the world for your lack of peace like everyone else does, blaming someone else and then going to war over it. We've seen that it doesn't work, but this does work. at least one person at a time. It may be invisible. Nobody may be able to see it. But meanwhile, the roots of existence, the subterranean, you know how in an aspen forest, all the trees are connected. They don't seem so. They seem like they're different trees. But the whole root system of all the aspen trees are connected to one another. They're communicating. It's kind of wild. And I don't think it's any different. We are communicating with our thoughts, words, and actions. We don't exist alone, independent from all of it. So please develop a more loving relationship to your mind. Please train your mind. Please awaken your mind for the benefit of all beings. So thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy your mind, even if it's crazy this week. Thanks for your attention. So stick around just 1 minute, and Mary may have some announcements.
Thanks, Howie. So there are, I put in the chat, there are 3 opportunities, depending on where you are in the world, to join Howie on retreat. If you are up in Edmonton, he will be there this weekend. And then there is a wait list for the Founders Retreat, which is September 9th through the 14th. And finally, for our friends in Arizona, in Prescott, Howie will be there September 19th through the 22nd. So yeah, he's busy month. And then just finally, just in terms of how he was talking about gladdening the mind, infusing the mind with joy, Donna is another way of doing that. So your invitation is always to take a moment, reflect upon the goodness in your own heart, the goodness of what you're offering, and offer with a glad heart, and then appreciate it. So all the information is in the chat. So thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Thanks in advance for your generosity. Feel free to unmute and say goodnight to each other. Those of you who are left, love being with you.